The conversation faltered when porcelain burst against the floorboards. Mrs. Pemberton's body followed an instant later. Miss Marple's eyes, sharper than most, caught two things: the unmistakable almond reek rising from the pot, and a figure in the corner who showed no shock, only careful calculation. The murder had just been carried out, and the culprit was calmly watching the aftermath. Gasps break into chaos. Chairs scrape, a tray crashes, someone screams. But before Miss Marple can even kneel beside Mrs. Pemberton, another victim stiffens. Mr. Hargreaves, the antiques dealer, clutches his throat, his eyes bulging as he collapses across the table, scattering porcelain and biscuits. 2 deaths in less than half a minute. Not by accident, not by chance. Method, cold, systematic method. "Don't touch the sugar!" Miss Marple's voice rings sharp through the pandemonium, commanding where the constable has not yet arrived. 6 spoons freeze mid-air. One girl shrieks, dropping hers with a clatter. Already the pattern is clear: poison seeded among the sugar crystals, unseen and lethal. Someone engineered this, and someone is ready to strike again. She bends quickly over Mrs. Pemberton, confirming what she already knows. No pulse, lips already turning blue. Bitter almonds. Cyanide. Fatal, swift, cruel. Her sharp eyes flick toward the window where frightened villagers press close, some pounding at the glass, others pulling back in horror. But one man near the back door slips out quietly, his face blank, his pace too calm. She sees him, notes him, memorizes him. He doesn't run like a terrified villager. He walks like someone who has just tested his weapon. Then another scream. This time from Elsie, the maid, clutching her mouth, her eyes wide. She had licked the sugar spoon. Without hesitation, Miss Marple darts forward, slapping the spoon from her hand. "Spit it out!" "Now, child!" Elsie gags violently, choking, but manages to vomit onto the flagstones. The acrid stench burns the nose. She collapses into Marple's arms, trembling but alive, barely. The shop erupts in pandemonium. Shouts for the doctor, the constable, for anyone. But Miss Marple's mind runs ahead. 2 dead, 1 nearly taken, and the killer still in the room minutes ago. The pattern is too familiar. Poison wielded with precision, victims chosen not by chance, but by purpose. Pemberton and Hargreaves were both tied to the same secret: old debts, whispered scandals, property deeds that had long ago vanished. This is no random madness. This is a purge. She rises, eyes hard as steel. "Listen to me," she says above the noise, her frail figure commanding sudden attention. "This is no accident. And the killer is not finished. They will strike again, tonight, perhaps within the hour, and I already know who they are." The crowd gasps, the words freezing them where they stand. The sugar bowl is covered with a napkin, the evidence held tight. Somewhere, in the street outside, the killer moves through the gathering night, unseen but not unfelt. Miss Marple steadies herself, her heart thudding. She has seen killers before, but never one so swift, so ruthless, so willing to strike again in full daylight. And already she feels the cold certainty. She has marked herself by speaking aloud. The killer will silence her next. The bodies of Mrs. Pemberton and Mr. Hargreaves had not yet cooled when panic swept Peacock Lane. Word of the double death raced like fire through dry straw, murder in the tea shop, poison in the sugar. Doors slammed, shutters banged, villagers shouted warnings as though evil itself had descended on the cobbles. But Miss Marple, standing with her shawl drawn tight, saw beyond the chaos. She had been right. This was no single strike of malice, but a sequence, a plan. A list was being crossed off, and the hand that held it was merciless. "Where is Constable Briggs?" someone cried. "Where's the law?" But no one waited for an answer. They fled indoors, bolting themselves in. Others clustered around Miss Marple, their fear spilling into accusation. Who would do such a thing? Why Pemberton? Why Hargreaves? Who's next? Marple lifted a thin hand. Quiet. Think. These were not random. Both had ties to that matter of the deeds. Yes, you know of what I speak. A quarrel buried years ago, but not forgotten. Whoever killed them means to silence all who were involved. Her voice sharpened. That means others among you are already marked. The crowd shuddered, some muttering denials, others darting fearful glances. Mrs. Henderson clutched her shawl tighter, paling. The vicar's wife whispered furiously to her neighbor. The schoolmaster missed her. Cleve stood with arms folded, his face unreadable, but his eyes flickered too quickly. Marple noted every reaction. Each was a piece of the pattern. Suddenly, a cry rang from the end of the lane. Mr. Fitch, the gravedigger, staggered into sight, his hands clawing at his throat. Villagers screamed as he fell face first into the mud, his body convulsing. Miss Marple rushed forward, skirts catching on the cobbles, but she knew before she touched him. Too late. His eyes had already glazed, his breath rattling into silence. Another one is gone. The third victim in less than 15 minutes. Gasps broke into wailing. "We're all doomed!" someone shouted. Panic surged, the crowd turning wild-eyed. Some pushed to run, others shouted at to bar doors, others simply wailed. The air was thick with terror. But Miss Marple rose, her voice sharper than the clamor. "Enough! Every scream, every panic only feeds him. Do you not see? He wants you scattered, helpless, alone." They stilled, trembling, their fear pressing in like a tide. Marple's eyes swept them, sharp as pins. This is no madness. It is a methodical purge. Each victim tied to that secret, each death more brazen. He is among us now, watching. And I tell you this: if you run, you will fall as Fitch has fallen. If you stand together, you may yet live. Before she could say more, a shadow lunged from the corner of the lane. A heavy figure crashed into her, a glint of steel flashing in the lantern light. Gasps rose in a single scream. Miss Marple twisted aside just as the knife swept down. The blade slashed her shawl, cutting clean through the wool. She stumbled back, her heart pounding, the killer's breath hot at her cheek. For an instant she stared into cold, empty eyes. Then the figure was gone, melting into the alleys with terrifying swiftness. The villagers shrieked, some pulling her to her feet, others babbling in terror. Marple steadied herself, her breath sharp, but her gaze calm. "You see," she said grimly, "he knows I am close. He means to silence me before I speak, but he has shown his hand too boldly." She lifted the shredded edge of her shawl, the cut clean and fresh. "He will strike again. Tonight?" Perhaps within the hour Constable Briggs finally arrived, breathless, pushing through the crowd. "What's all this?" His face blanched at the sight of Fitch's body sprawled in the mud. "God help us! Another?" "Not another," Marple corrected firmly. "The third. And the killer has grown reckless. He struck at me directly." She fixed her eyes on Briggs. "You must bar the church. Gather everyone there, where all eyes can watch. Alone, they will fall. Together, perhaps we can hold on." Briggs looked helpless, sweat streaking his brow. "But I can't command them. They'll never listen to me." "They'll listen to me," Marple said quietly, but with iron in her tone. "Because they must." She turned to the crowd, her voice rising. "If you wish to see dawn, you will obey. To the church now." Not one of you strays, not one of you lingers. Go, reluctance warred with desperation, but one by one they moved, clutching shawls, dragging children, whispering prayers. The bell at Saint. Luke's tolled faintly in the mist as the procession wound toward it. Marple kept to the rear, eyes scanning every face, every shadow. She felt the killer's gaze still upon her, sharp and calculating. Each step was a challenge, each breath borrowed. He had tried to silence her once already. He would not wait long to try again. At the church doors she paused, turning to Briggs. "Guard these well. The killer walks among us, and he will try again." She looked back at the villagers pressed close, their eyes wide with fear. "This night is not over. The pattern is clear, and the next victim has already been chosen." The words fell like a chill across the crowd. Murmurs rose, frantic. "Who? Who is it? Is it me? Tell us, Miss Marple." But she shook her head slowly, her face grave. "Not yet. The killer's net is closing. One misstep, and any of you could be the next. We must watch, and we must be ready." The heavy doors creaked shut, the bolts sliding home with a hollow clang. Inside, candles flickered, casting long shadows across stone walls. Miss Marple drew her shawl tighter around her torn sleeve, her heart still hammering from the blade's kiss. 3 dead, 1 nearly taken, and the killer hunting her openly. She felt the danger thick as smoke. The night had only begun. The bolts of Saint. Luke's slammed shut with a hollow clang that seemed to echo through every chest. For a brief moment the villagers stood in stunned silence, their fear pressed into uneasy stillness by the thick stone walls. Candles sputtered along the nave, throwing tall, nervous shadows that quivered with each draught. Mothers clutched their children, men stood in stiff knots, and the old pressed trembling hands together in prayer. Miss Marple, her shawl still torn from the knife that had slashed her sleeve on the lane, walked slowly down the aisle. Her eyes moved from face to face, sharp and unrelenting. She had been in many drawing rooms, had listened to countless conversations of gossip and whispers, but never had the stakes felt so immediate, so raw. The killer was no longer content to poison cups unseen. He had raised his knife against her directly. That meant one thing. He feared her. He knew she was too close. Constable Briggs planted himself squarely by the barred doors, puffing out his chest in an attempt at authority. His truncheon wobbled slightly in his hand. "We're safe here," he announced, his voice cracking as though even he did not believe the words. "No one gets in or out without me knowing." "No," Miss Marple said firmly, her thin voice slicing through the murmurs. "Safety is not these walls. Safety is the only truth. Until the killer is unmasked, every man, woman, and child here is prey." Gasps rose. A woman cried out, "How do we know it isn't you?" Another muttered, "Death follows her steps." The frightened crowd turned their suspicion upon the frail old woman at the center of it all. Marple felt the weight of their eyes, but she met them calmly, her back straight. "Because I have no quarrel with land deeds or vanished papers. I have no stake in secrets best forgotten, but some of you do. And he," her eyes swept the rows of faces, sharp as needles, "is thinning you one by one until his secret dies with you." The words cut deep. Panic churned into murmurs, then half-formed accusations. The vicar's wife wrung her hands, whispering prayers. Mr. Cleeve, the schoolmaster, sat too upright, his calm too rigid. Mrs. Henderson trembled openly, her lips white. Each expression told its tale, and Miss Marple read them as a seamstress reads stitches. Then it came, the sound of boots on wood. A thump from the gallery above. The entire congregation jumped, eyes darting to the dark balcony that loomed over them. Briggs barked, "Stay where you are," and moved toward the stairs, each step hesitant. The villagers clutched each other, whispering prayers. And then the scream. High, shrill, cut short. Mrs. Henderson, seated near the front, toppled sideways in her pew, thrashing, her mouth foaming, her body jerking uncontrollably. The crowd erupted in horror. Marple was already moving, skirts brushing against the flagstones. She forced open Henderson's jaw. A sweet wrapper crackled in her hand, damp with saliva. Poison again. Her nose filled with the unmistakable almond stench. "Water, quickly!" she commanded, but before any could bring it, Henderson's spasms weakened. Her chest rattled once, then fell still. Her hand slid limply to the stone. Another one is gone. The fourth victim in less than an hour. The villagers screamed, some shoving back from the pews, others sobbing. A man shouted, "She sat right beside us. How could it be done under our very eyes?" Another cried, "We're trapped like animals." Several turned on Marple, voices sharp with hysteria. "You promised safety here. She's dead, dead in front of you." Miss Marple rose slowly, her face pale, her hands trembling only slightly. "Yes," she said grimly, "because silence still rules." Henderson knew the truth of those deeds, and now she is silenced. "How many more must fall before one of you finds the courage to speak?" She raised her voice, her words cracking like a whip. "Do you wish me to be next? Because he will not stop until he has me, too." The uproar faltered, the congregation hanging on her words. Then, from the shadows of the vestry, a sound broke the hush, a laugh, low, mocking, deliberate. It echoed through the nave like a serpent's hiss. The villagers shrieked, twisting to look. Briggs charged toward the vestry, truncheon raised, but when he flung the door open, only darkness and cobwebs greeted him. The laugh had vanished, but its echo clung to the walls like smoke. The killer was not only present, he was confident, toying with them. Marple's skin prickled, but her voice was steady. "He is here, watching every move we make. And now he knows his next strike must be me." Briggs stumbled back, his face pale. "Then we'll guard you." "No," Marple cut him off. "If you guard me, he will strike another, as he struck Henderson. His pattern is clear. Silence the witnesses, then silence me. Guarding me will not stop him. It will only buy him another victim." Her thin frame seemed to expand, her eyes blazing with a resolve that silenced argument. "Which means he will try tonight, and I will be ready." The villagers gasped, their fear mounting. "You can't," one cried. "He'll kill you." Marple's tone softened, almost weary, but still firm. "If I must risk my life to reveal this, then I will. Better one death with truth than many in silence." She had barely spoken when a shadow lunged from behind the altar rail. A flash of steel gleamed in the candlelight. Marple twisted, but the knife swept across her sleeve, slicing fabric, and skin pain seared her arm, warm blood staining her shawl. She staggered, clutching the wound. Gasps rang out, villagers screaming. Briggs hurled himself forward, but the figure melted back into the shadows, slipping through a side door. Only the echo of retreating footsteps remained. Marple pressed her handkerchief to the wound, her breath ragged. The villagers crowded around, their fear now tinged with awe. She raised her head, eyes bright despite the pain. "Do you see?" she said through clenched teeth. "He wants me silenced. But he has shown his hand too boldly. He cannot hide forever." The crowd murmured, some emboldened, others trembling. Suspicion spread anew, eyes darting to Cleve, to the vicar's wife, to anyone who had seemed too calm. Human nature laid bare in fear. yet none dared step forward with truth. Still they clung to silence, and silence was the killer's greatest ally. Marple stood taller despite the bloodied sleeve, her gaze sweeping the frightened faces. "You mocked me as prey," she whispered, her voice low but carrying. "But know this, I am not so easy to kill. I will see your face before dawn, and when I do, this game ends." The villagers drew closer, huddling in flickering candlelight, every creak of wood, every sigh of wind making them flinch. Briggs tightened the bolts on the door, his truncheon clutched in both hands. But Miss Marple stood in the center, her thin frame unyielding, her heart pounding but her resolve steel. She had stared into death before. Tonight she stared it down again, and this time she knew the killer would not stop until one of them was gone. The church was stifling, not from heat. Cold draughts still crept beneath the doors and rattled the old windows, but from fear. It pressed against the stone walls, breathing heavier than any storm. The villagers huddled in clumps of family or neighbors, whispering furiously, casting glances at one another as though every face might conceal a knife or a vial of poison. Miss Marple stood at the center, shawl drawn close around her bloodied sleeve, her blue eyes flinty in the candlelight. She knew the truth. The killer was not finished. Someone else was already marked, and she believed she knew who. Constable Briggs shifted uneasily at the door, knuckling white on his truncheon. He looked more like a schoolboy caught out of bounds than a protector of the law. "We should wait till morning," he muttered. "The inspector will come from Milchester." "Best hold tight till then. By morning," Miss Marple said coldly, "there will be more corpses laid out before this altar." Her voice carried, silencing the murmurs around her. "You do not understand, Constable. The pace has quickened. 3 in the tea-shop, Fitch in the lane, Henderson here under your very nose. He will not pause. He will strike again, and soon. And I believe the next is already chosen." A ripple passed through the congregation. People gasped, some clutching their shawls, others shrinking deeper into the pews. The vicar whispered a prayer under his breath, while the boy saved earlier by Marple clung to his mother, wide-eyed. Fear, like a tide, lapped higher with every word. "Who?" someone cried. "Tell us who it is." Marple scanned the faces, her gaze sharp, unyielding. "I believe the butcher, Mr. Tilling is next." She turned to where the burly man sat hunched, sweat gleaming on his brow. He jerked as though struck, his mouth working silently. "He was part of that quarrel over the deeds, though he has tried to bury it. He saw too much then, and worse, he saw something tonight. He recognized the face in the tea-shop, though fear has kept him silent. That silence has made him a target." All eyes swung to Tilling. He shook his head violently, his ruddy face pale. "No, I swear it. I saw nothing, I know nothing." His voice cracked. "You can't lay this on me, Miss Marple. I'll not be the scapegoat for your fantasies." Marple's eyes hardened. "Then why, when the blade flashed at me in the lane, did your gaze go not to me but to Cleve? Why do your eyes still dart to him whenever guilt is named? You know, and that knowledge has painted a mark upon your back," the villagers muttered, some whispering fiercely. Cleve himself sat stiff and silent, his face unreadable, hands folded too neatly in his lap. Tilling stared at the floor, trembling. His denial convinced no one. Before the crowd could swell further into panic, a loud pounding rattled the church doors. The bolts groaned. Villagers shrieked, pressing backward. Briggs leapt, truncheon raised. The pounding came again. 3 heavy blows, then silence. Only the sound of the wind followed. Briggs swallowed hard, beads of sweat rolling down his temple. "He's out there," he whispered hoarsely. "Waiting." Marple stepped forward, her voice ringing. "No, he is here. He has shown us already. Poisoned sweets in pews, a laugh in the shadows. He is not prowling the lane like a wolf. He is among us, masked in neighbors' clothing. And if we wait, he will slip his hand to the butcher's throat before dawn." The tension broke into shouts. "Then move him. Lock him alone. Send him into the vestry." Tilling panicked, rising to his feet. "No, you won't pen me in like a calf to the slaughter. If I stay here, he'll strike me down before your eyes." Marple's eyes flashed. "If you leave, he will cut you down in the dark. If you scatter, he will pluck you off one by one. That is his plan. But if I go with you, we may yet catch him at his work." She turned to Briggs. "Unbar the door. I will escort Tilling to his shop. He must be warned, and I must see the trap for myself." The constable gaped. "At this hour? In this fog? He'll slit your throat before you reach the gate." "Perhaps," Marple said quietly. "But better one chance in the open than certain death within. If he means to strike, let him strike where all may see." Her voice sharpened. "Do as I say." Briggs hesitated, then obeyed, sliding the bolts free. The heavy doors creaked open, mist rolling in like breath from the grave. Gasps rose. The villagers clutched one another, their fear thick as smoke. Marple drew her shawl tighter, her wounded arm throbbing, but her step steady. "Come, Mr. Tilling," she said. "We walk together." Reluctantly, the butcher lumbered to her side, his massive shoulders hunched, his face pale beneath the sweat. Briggs followed, the lantern raised high, though his hand shook. The three stepped into the night, the heavy doors clanging shut behind them. Peacock Lane lay in silence, muffled by fog. The mist curled around hedges and lamp-posts, swallowing the cobbles. Every window seemed like an eye watching. Every rustle of leaves, every creak of timber sounded like footsteps just out of sight. They moved quickly, the lanterns swaying, shadows dancing madly around them. Tilling muttered under his breath, voice hoarse. "I should never have come to the tea shop. I knew it would be trouble." Marple shot him a sharp glance. "You knew, because you recognized him. Admit it. That is why you are marked." He shook his head violently, sweat dripping from his brow. "No, I saw nothing." But his trembling betrayed him. They reached his shop, its shutters closed, a faint glow seeping through the cracks. Tilling fumbled with the key, his thick fingers clumsy. "Quickly," Marple urged. "If he is near, he will not wait long." The door swung open, and they hurried inside. The butcher's shop smelled of sawdust and raw meat. Hooks gleamed dully in the lantern light, shadows stretching long across the tiled floor. Marple's sharp eyes swept the room. Nothing moved, but the air felt heavy, charged as though violence lay coiled in the corners. Tilling sagged against the counter, wiping his brow. "Safe," he muttered. "At least here I'm safe." "No," Marple said, her voice cutting. "You are safest only when truth is spoken. Speak it now, before he strikes again. Whose face did you see?" His lips trembled, his eyes darted to the darkened doorway at the back of the shop. For a heartbeat he seemed about to speak, but the glass shattered. A dark figure crashed through the rear, blade gleaming in the lantern light. Tilling roared, seizing a cleaver from the counter. The intruder lunged. Steel clashed on steel, sparks flying as the butcher swung desperately. Briggs shouted. Truncheon raised, but the killer moved with terrifying swiftness, slashing at both men. Marple, heart pounding, snatched the lantern and thrust it forward, its sudden flare blinding the attacker. He hissed, recoiling, then spun and vanished into the fog outside as swiftly as he had come. The shop fell into silence, broken only by Tilling's ragged gasps. His cleaver clattered to the floor. He leaned hard on the counter, his chest heaving. "God save us," he whispered. "You were right. I saw him. I saw his face in the tea shop, and I saw it again tonight." Marple stepped closer, eyes blazing. "Then name him. Speak before fear strangles you again." But he shook his head, lips pressed tight, sweat pouring. "Not yet. I can't. If I speak, he'll kill me." His voice cracked. "He'll kill us all." Before Marple could answer, the sound of the church bell split the night. It tolled wildly, unevenly, as though pulled by frantic hands. Her heart lurched. Something had gone wrong in the sanctuary. While she had fought to save Tilling, the killer had doubled back. Another strike, another life taken. She seized Tilling's arm, her voice fierce. "Then you will speak before silence damns us all. But first we run, back to the church. If we delay, we will find another body waiting." Together they staggered into the fog, the lantern light bobbing, the bell's desperate clang carrying across Peacock Lane like a cry of warning. The church bell's wild tolling reverberated through the mist like a cry of doom. Each uneven clang struck Miss Marple's heart like a hammer blow. She and Tilling stumbled back up Peacock Lane, Briggs puffing behind them, his lantern swinging wildly. The fog thickened, muffling their steps, making every shadow loom monstrous. The bell did not sound like a call to worship. It sounded like panic itself given voice. "God save us," Briggs panted. "Something's happened inside. Something terrible." "Of course something has," Miss Marple snapped, sharper than she intended. "We left them with a wolf in their midst." The killer took his chance the moment our backs were turned. She gripped Tilling's arm harder, forcing the butcher to keep pace despite his trembling bulk. "Hurry, man! If you still want breath in your body, move faster." At last they reached St. Luke's. A knot of villagers spilled into the yard, shouting, weeping, some clutching shawls about their shoulders. The bell's clang ceased abruptly, as if cut off by a strangling hand. Miss Marple pushed her way through the crowd and into the nave. Her eyes adjusted quickly to the flickering candlelight, and her heart sank. The vicar's wife lay across the front pew, head tilted back, her eyes wide and glassy. Her prayer book lay on the floor, pages torn where her fingers had clawed at them. Around her mouth, faint foam gleamed in the candlelight. The sharp tang of almonds still lingered on the polished wood of the pew rail where she had rested her hand. Poison again, this time cunningly smeared where no one would suspect. She had been silenced in the very act of prayer. Gasps and cries filled the church. "Not her! Dear God, no! We're cursed, cursed!" The villagers pressed back from the body, some sobbing, others staring in horror. Miss Marple bent beside the fallen woman, closing her staring eyes with steady fingers. Her own throat tightened with sorrow, but her face remained composed. "She is gone," she said quietly. Another witness silenced. Tilling groaned, staggering back against the pews. She knew everything," he whispered. "And now—" He stopped as though afraid to finish. Briggs looked helpless, wringing his hands. "How can he do this under our very eyes? We're locked in, for God's sake, and still he strikes." "Because you are blind," Marple said with sudden fierceness. She rose, her bloodied sleeve dark in the candlelight. "You think these stone walls protect you. They protect him. He does not need to break in. He is already here." Her eyes swept the crowd, hard as steel. "He has been here all along." Her words rippled through the congregation like lightning. Villagers turned on one another with frantic suspicion. "It's him!" "No, her!" "She's too quiet. Look at her!" Fear threatened to explode into violence. Briggs raised his truncheon, but his authority was a child's toy against such terror. "Stop!" Marple's command rang out like a whip-crack. The villagers froze, stunned by her sheer certainty. She moved to the altar, raising her voice to reach every ear. "Do you not see? Panic is his greatest weapon. Each death feeds your fear, and each fearful silence grants him another chance. That is his pattern: poison, blade, fear, silence, over and over, until no one remains who remembers the truth of those deeds." The crowd shivered, some nodding unwillingly. The boy clutched his mother tighter. Cleve, seated in the corner, watched with narrowed eyes, his face composed, but too composed, as though carved in stone. Marple's gaze lingered on him for half a heartbeat before sweeping on. Not yet, she thought. The moment was not ripe. Before she could speak further, a sudden cry rose near the back. A young maid, Elsie, the same girl who had nearly died from a poisoned spoon in the tea shop, staggered into view, clutching her throat. Her face twisted in agony, her hands clawing at the air. She collapsed onto the flagstones, her body jerking. A half-eaten biscuit fell from her limp fingers, crumbs scattering. The almond reek curled upward again. Poison. This time it was fatal. A wail ripped through the villagers, piercing and raw. Mothers covered their children's eyes. Men cursed, some slamming fists against pews. Marple knelt swiftly beside Elsie, but the girl's chest rose only once more before stilling. Miss Marple bowed her head for a brief moment of grief, then looked up, her face hard as flint. "Even the innocent," she said quietly, but with force that carried through the entire church. "She was not part of your quarrel. She was taken to frighten me. Do you not understand? This is his warning. He will kill any of you to get to me." The villagers erupted again, this time with fury instead of despair. Some shouted, "Name him, miss! Marple, end this!" Others cried, "We cannot stay here. He's everywhere." Several surged toward the doors, clawing at the bolts, desperate to flee. Briggs shouted, swinging his truncheon, but the mob pressed on. Miss Marple strode to the bell rope and pulled with all her strength. The deep clang boomed through the nave, stunning the crowd into stillness. She let the rope fall, her breath sharp. "Listen to me," she cried. "If you scatter into the dark, he will cut you down one by one, as he did Fitch, as he did Henderson. He wants you frightened, divided, running blind. That is how he hunts. Do you mean to give him exactly what he wants?" The silence that followed was thick, broken only by ragged breathing. Slowly, fear bent into reluctant stillness. The villagers looked at her now, not with suspicion, but with desperate dependence. She had become the only steady voice in a night of chaos. She lowered her tone, though it carried just as firmly. "From this moment, no one moves without my word. You will remain together in sight of one another. That is the only safety left to you. Call it law, call it martial law, but it will be obeyed." No one dared protest. Heads bowed. Some murmured assent. The crowd huddled closer, clinging to the fragile order her command provided. Yet suspicion still simmered in their eyes, and Marple knew it would take only one more scream to shatter the fragile calm. She turned to Tilling, who leaned pale and sweating against a pillar. "You saw his face," she said softly but firmly. "You saw it in the tea shop, and again tonight. Speak before silence damns us all." He looked at her with haunted eyes, his lips trembling. "If I say his name, he'll slit my throat before dawn." His voice cracked. "He'll slit yours, too." Marple gripped his sleeve with surprising strength. "He will slit them anyway if you do not. Do you not understand? Each death strengthens him, weakens us. Your silence is his shield." Before he could answer, a sudden smash of glass rang out. A stone hurtled through the high window, clattering across the nave. Tied to it was a scrap of cloth. Briggs snatched it up and unrolled it with shaking hands. Scrawled in jagged ink were the words, "One by one, until the last. Even you, Miss Marple." The crowd gasped as one, a sound like a single great breath of dread. Some wailed, others clutched crosses or prayer beads. Marple stood still, reading the words twice, then thrice. She felt no surprise, only confirmation. The killer had marked her openly. She was his ultimate quarry, and he was bold enough to taunt her before the crowd. She folded the cloth, her face pale but resolute. "So there it is," she said quietly. "You all have read your death sentence. He means to take you one by one until only I remain, and then he will strike me. But I swear this to you, before that blade falls, I will speak his name." The villagers leaned forward, desperate, almost begging. "Then tell us now. Name him now." But Marple shook her head slowly. "Not yet. To accuse too soon is to risk the wrong death. He must damn himself with his own hand. One more slip, one more strike, and he will be naked before us all." The candles guttered in a sudden draught, shadows leaping across the stone. The villagers huddled tighter, eyes darting. Briggs rebolted the door, his face pale. Tilling sagged, whispering a prayer, and Miss Marple stood at the center, shawl tight around her bloodied arm, eyes cold and unyielding. She knew the killer would strike again soon. She knew the next body might be her own, but she also knew that the noose was tightening, and this time the hunter's mask was already cracking. The church reeked of smoke from guttering candles, of sweat from terrified bodies, and of the faint, bitter trace of almonds that seemed to hang in the very stone. Miss Marple stood at the center, frail but unbending, the threatening note clenched in her hand. Its words burned into her mind, one by one, until the last. "Even you, Miss Marple." She had known it was true before she read it, but seeing it scrawled in ink brought a cold finality. The killer was finished with shadows and whispers. He was declaring open war. The villagers pressed against the pews, muttering, crying, shouting accusations. Fear had broken them. Mrs. Broom shrieked, "She's cursed us! She brought this evil here." Another voice shouted, "She knew too much from the start. Maybe she is the killer." Several turned, their faces twisted with suspicion, pointing at the old woman who had been the only steady hand all night. Constable Briggs, red-faced and sweating, raised his truncheon. "Enough of this! Back, all of you!" But his voice cracked, and no one listened. Panic was stronger than authority. The crowd surged, some toward the doors, others toward Miss Marple herself. For a moment it seemed they might tear her down in their terror. Then she seized the bell rope and pulled with all her might. The heavy iron bell tolled once, twice, its deep clang quivering through the nave like a warning from heaven itself. The mob froze, startled into silence. Marple let the rope fall and straightened, her eyes flashing. "Listen to me," she cried. "Do you not see? Every scream, every false accusation, every coward's silence feeds him. He wants you to panic. He wants you divided. And while you claw at each other, he strikes again and again. Will you hold his throat so willingly?" The villagers shrank back, ashamed, cowed by her certainty. Some wept quietly, others hung their heads. Even those who had pointed at her moments earlier now lowered their arms. Briggs sighed with relief, but Marple did not relax. She knew how thin their obedience was. Fear could fracture it at any second. She paced slowly before the altar, her bloodied sleeve clinging to her arm, every eye following her. From this moment forward, no one leaves this church. No one moves alone, no one hides in the shadows. If you must speak, you speak where all can hear. This is not a choice, but a law. Martial law, if you like. Disobey, and you give yourself to him. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Some nodded, some looked mutinous, but none dared defy her outright. They were sheep, and she had become their shepherd, even if they did not love her for it. Mr. Cleeve, the schoolmaster, rose slowly, his posture stiff, his voice calm and deliberate. An old woman seizes command and we all bow? This is madness. Fear rules her as much as it does us. Why should we obey her more than the constable? His tone was smooth, reasonable, even persuasive. Several villagers looked at him, wavering. Marple met his gaze, her eyes narrowing. Because the constable has lost control already. Because you would be corpses but for me. And because— She stepped closer, her voice low, dangerous. I see the cracks in your calm, Mr. Cleeve. The mask you wear is too neat. Masks always crack. For the first time, Cleeve's jaw twitched. He lowered his eyes, then sat again, his hands folded too tightly in his lap. The villagers looked between him and Marple, unsettled. A seed of suspicion had been planted. The moment broke with a sudden cough. The boy Marple had saved earlier slumped against his mother, clutching his stomach. She screamed, fumbling to hold him upright. The crowd panicked, pressing back, fearing another poisoned sweet. Marple darted forward, prying his hands open. A crumpled wrapper fell to the floor. She snatched it up, sniffed it, and flung it aside. "He is not poisoned," she declared sharply, "only frightened and faint." Relief swept through the crowd, though the boy's mother still sobbed with terror. Marple lifted the child's chin, forcing his eyes to meet hers. "Remember this night," she said softly. "Remember how near you came to silence." She rose, turning back to the congregation. "Do you see? He will not stop. He hides poison in pews, blades in shadows, terror in every whisper. You cannot fight him with fear. Only the truth unmasks him." Tilling stirred at the back, his face pale, his shirt damp with sweat. I saw him," he blurted suddenly. All eyes swung to him. He swallowed, trembling. "In the shop. In the tea-room." I know his face. Gasps erupted. Marple's eyes gleamed. "Then speak it, mister. Tilling. Speak his name, and end this." But his courage faltered. He shook his head violently, gripping the pew rail. "If I say it, I'm dead before dawn. He'll slit me open the moment I speak." He clamped his mouth shut, tears squeezing from his eyes. Silence fell heavy. Once again, fear had won. Marple's jaw tightened. She leaned close, whispering fiercely, "You are dead already if you keep silent. Every heartbeat is borrowed. If you would live, speak." But he turned his face away, lips sealed. Her fury flared, but she knew pressing harder would only break him completely. For now she had to wait. A crash broke the silence. The organ pipes boomed suddenly, a discordant roar that shook the church. The villagers screamed, clutching one another, staring wide-eyed at the great instrument looming at the far end. Briggs ran to the gallery, lantern raised, but found nothing, only dust and cobwebs. Yet the sound had been real, deliberate. Another taunt, another reminder. I am here. I am watching. The villagers dissolved again into whispers, some sobbing, others trembling. Marple felt their fear pressing against her like a storm tide. She raised her voice once more, cutting through the clamor. "Enough! He is not a phantom. He is flesh and blood, and I promise you, before dawn, his mask will fall." The candles sputtered low. Shadows lengthened along the stone. The villagers huddled close together, their eyes fixed on Marple as though her frail body alone held back death. She stood firm, though her wounded arm ached and her throat burned with exhaustion. She knew the truth. The killer had her marked, and he would strike again soon. She must be ready. She must set her trap. For a long moment silence pressed heavy on the nave. Then from the shadows near the vestry came a sound, a chuckle, low, mocking, unmistakably human. It slithered across the stone, freezing every heart. The villagers whimpered, clutching one another, eyes wide. Briggs spun, the lantern raised, but the laugh had already vanished. Only its echo lingered. Marple's blood chilled, but she did not flinch. She raised her chin, speaking into the darkness itself. "You think I'm weak, old, ready to fall. You are wrong. I have walked too many lanes, seen too many faces to be fooled by yours. Come for me if you dare. I am waiting." The villagers gasped at her audacity, some clutching rosaries, others staring in awe. The silence that followed was taut as a wire, every ear straining for the next sound. But none came, only the ticking of the great clock, slow and inexorable, marking each second toward dawn or toward death. Marple stood very still, her shadow stretching long against the altar. In her mind, the pieces aligned. The pattern was nearly complete. The killer's mask was cracking, and soon, very soon, it would fall. But until then, she must hold the line. She must keep the villagers from tearing each other apart before the truth could be revealed. Her bloodied sleeve clung to her arm. The threatening note burned in her pocket. And in the silence of St. Luke's, with terror thick as fog, Jane Marple prepared herself. She was no longer merely the observer. She was the bait in a deadly game, and she would play it to the end. The echoes of the mocking laugh still clung to the stone as if the walls themselves remembered the sound. The villagers sat stiff in their pews, every face pale, every eye wide, as though they feared a knife might dart from the shadows at any second. The silence after that. Laughter was worse than the noise. It was thick, suffocating, like the air in a crypt. Miss Marple stood very still, her bloodied sleeve clinging to her arm, her shawl pulled tight. She knew the killer was no longer content with poison and shadows. He was playing with them, striking openly in defiance, feeding on their fear. He had revealed too much already, but until he slipped further, until proof burned clear before every eye, she could not name him. Not yet. To speak too soon would spark a riot and give him cover. She would need to maneuver carefully, quietly, almost invisibly, like moving underground. Constable Briggs shifted miserably near the doors, his truncheon sagging in his grip. "We can't hold them much longer," he muttered, glancing at the restless crowd. "They'll turn on each other." "Or on you." "They must not," Marple said sharply. "If they scatter, if they give way to suspicion, he wins. Every scream, every foolish rush into the dark makes his hand stronger." Her eyes swept the villagers. "They need a tether. If they have no faith in the law, then they must place it in me." Her voice softened. "And so I will give them just enough hope to hold them still." But even as she spoke, another voice broke out. "We are caged here like rats." It was the miller's wife, her shawl slipping from her head, her eyes wild. "I won't stay to die in this tomb." She surged toward the door, shoving Briggs aside, clawing at the bolts with frantic hands. The constable grabbed her wrist, but she fought like a madwoman. "Let me go! I'll not wait for his knife." "Stop her!" someone cried. "She'll bring him down on us all." Marple strode forward, her voice rising above the din. "Madam, if you flee into the fog, you will not take 3 steps before he strikes you down. Do you want to die screaming in the lane as Fitch did?" But the woman only shrieked louder, pulling free with sudden strength. Before Marple could reach her, she threw back the bolts and flung the heavy doors wide. A rush of mist poured in. The villagers gasped as she bolted into the night, her figure vanishing quickly into the fog. For a heartbeat, silence held. Then the scream came, high, sharp, cut short. The villagers wailed. Briggs staggered back, his face ashen. Marple closed the doors herself, sliding the bolts firmly into place. "You see?" she said grimly, turning to the terrified faces. "That is what flight buys you. One more body for him, one more victory for silence and panic. If you value your lives, you will remain here, together, until this ends." No one argued. They sat trembling, cowed into stillness. Yet the air in the nave thickened with dread. Each face was drawn, each whisper sharp. Marple could feel the suspicion pulsing like a fever. It would break again if she did not act. She needed to expose the cracks in the killer's mask, to force him into rashness. And to do that, she would have to step outside their circle of light. She turned to Briggs, lowering her voice so only he heard. "We cannot wait for him to strike again. If we do, it will be a child next, or one of the frail. I must move unseen, test the shadows, see what he hides. You must hold them steady until I return." Briggs paled. "Go out there? Alone? He'll cut you down." Marple's eyes were cold. "He means to cut me down anyway. Better to choose the ground myself." She slipped from the altar into the side aisles, her shawl blending with the shadows. The villagers murmured nervously, but Briggs raised his truncheon and barked in silence. Marple moved quietly, her slippered feet soundless on the stone. She examined the pews, the vestry door, the stair to the gallery. Every creak, every draught was a clue. She moved like a ghost, unseen, unheard, searching for any trace of the predator among them. Near the vestry, she paused. A faint scuff of shoe leather reached her ears, too deliberate, too soft. She raised her lantern slightly. A shape shifted in the gloom, then froze. Her heart pounded, but her face remained calm. "Come out," she said evenly. "If you think shadows hide you, you are mistaken. I have lived too long to be fooled by silence." For a moment, nothing. Then Briggs's voice rang out from the nave. "She's gone underground. Look at her." The villagers stirred, heads turning, whispers rising. The shape slipped away, melting into the crowd. Marple returned to the center, her lips pressed thin. She had not seen the face, but she had seen enough. Someone in the vestry shadows, someone confident enough to wait there unseen, someone whose calm never cracked. She turned to Tilling. He was shaking, his hands gripping the pew rail. "You saw him," she said sharply. "You saw the face in the tea shop. If you speak now, you save yourself and every soul here." He shook his head violently, sweat dripping. I can't. His eyes darted to Cleve, then dropped again. Marple's suspicion sharpened. Fear of one man bound his tongue more tightly than fear of death itself. She raised her voice to the villagers. "Do you see? His silence damns you all. Every one of you is held hostage by fear, and until it breaks, more will die." As if in answer, a sudden flare of flame lit the nave. A lantern had been knocked over, its oil spilling across the flagstones. Fire licked at the base of a pew. The villagers screamed, scrambling back. Briggs and 2 men hurled coats onto the blaze, stamping furiously until the flames died, smoke filling the air. In the confusion, Marple counted faces, and her blood chilled. One was missing. The miller's wife had already died outside. Now another had vanished from their number. The killer had used fire and fear to pluck another victim from their sight. The villagers wailed, "He's in here! We're all doomed!" Panic surged once more, threatening to break the fragile order. Marple raised her lantern high, her face pale, but her voice fierce. "Enough! He is here, yes, but not as smoke or shadow. He walks among you, eats with you, prays with you. And before this night is out, I will name him." The villagers fell silent, staring at her with desperate eyes. Marple stood very still, her shadow stretching long behind her. She knew the killer was tightening his net around her. Every moment brought him closer to striking. But she also knew this. She had forced him to reveal himself too often. Soon his mask would slip beyond repair. And when it did, she would be waiting. The smoke from the extinguished fire hung in the air like a shroud. The villagers coughed and fanned their faces, their eyes darting wildly in every direction. They had counted heads twice now, and still one remained missing. No one spoke the vanished woman's name aloud, as though saying it would make the death more real. Miss Marple, however, needed no such hesitation. The killer had struck again, not with poison this time, but with panic, smoke, and distraction. Each ploy revealed more of his character. He was cunning, adaptable, ruthless, and, most importantly, he was desperate. She moved slowly to the altar, setting her lantern upon the rail so its glow spread wide across the nave. Her voice was quiet, but cut clean through the anxious murmurs. "Do you not see the pattern yet? Poison in the tea shop, poison in the pew, knife in the fog, fire in the nave. Each act is more reckless than the last. Each act performed because he knows time grows short. He cannot keep the mask in place much longer." Her eyes swept them, sharp as pins. "We are down to the final names, and soon only one will remain." Gasps broke out. A farmer clutched his wife's hand. Someone sobbed quietly. The boy's mother rocked him gently, whispering prayers. Cleve, seated in the front pew, sat perfectly still, his hands folded in his lap, his expression calm. Too calm, Marple thought. A man who was innocent would tremble, or rage, or plead. Cleve simply waited. She turned deliberately toward Mr. Tilling. The butcher's broad shoulders hunched forward, his face slick with sweat. He looked as though he might collapse under the weight of every eye upon him. "You saw his face," Marple said sharply, her voice cutting through the smoke. "You saw him in the tea shop. You saw him again in your shop tonight. Your silence has already bought the lives of 3 women. Will you pay for more with your cowardice?" Tilling's lips trembled. His eyes darted toward Cleve, then away again. He shook his head violently. "If I speak, he'll kill me before dawn," he whispered hoarsely. "He'll kill us all." His voice broke, and he buried his face in his hands. The villagers gasped, whispering, staring between the butcher and the schoolmaster. Marple's eyes narrowed. "You see it yourselves, do you not? His fear is not of shadows. It is one among us, one who has power enough to silence him without lifting a blade. Who could that be?" Her gaze slid slowly back to Cleve. "Who commands not through strength of arm, but with words, with intimidation, with a mask of calm authority?" The villagers stirred uneasily, murmurs swelling. Cleve rose at last, his tall frame imposing in the flickering light. His voice, when it came, was smooth, measured, and confident. "This is absurd. You drive frightened people into a frenzy, Miss Marple. You turn their fear into suspicion, and you point it at me because I do not weep or wail like the rest. But composure is not guilt. I am as endangered as anyone here." "You mistake silence for composure," Marple replied, her tone razor-sharp. "But I have lived long enough to know the difference. Composure is calm in a crisis. Silence is the shield of the guilty. And you, Mr. Cleeve, have been too silent for too long." He smiled faintly, a teacher correcting a wayward pupil. "Or perhaps, unlike others here, I do not let panic cloud my judgment." Marple's gaze did not waver. "No, but arrogance can cloud it just as well." The villagers shifted, torn between his smooth confidence and her fierce certainty. Some nodded at Cleeve's words, others whispered that Miss Marple had been right all along. The tension tightened like a rope. One more death would snap it. The boy coughed suddenly, drawing every head. His mother cried out, clutching him. "Not again!" she wailed. But Marple was there in an instant, prying his fingers open. Only dust from the pew rails clung to his hands. She held them high. "Not poison," she said firmly. "Not yet." But a warning. He is testing the ground, reminding us that he can strike anywhere. She glared toward Cleeve. For just a heartbeat, his lips tightened before he smoothed them back into calm. She saw it. A crack in the mask. Small, but there. She stood, her voice ringing. "I will tell you this. The killer is among the three who remain most closely tied to the quarrel of the deeds. Tilling, who fears him, Henderson, now silenced, and Cleeve, who sits calm while death walks among us. Which of these does your instinct tell you hides the knife?" The villagers gasped, heads turning to Cleeve again. Suspicion bloomed wider. Cleeve's voice rose, sharper now. "This is madness. You are all frightened sheep, and she leads you into a frenzy. You will have blood on your hands before dawn, and it will not be mine. Look at her. Death follows her steps. Perhaps she is the one. An old woman with poison in her pocket, weaving lies as she goes." The villagers recoiled, eyes swinging wildly between him and Marple. For a moment, the tide shifted. Fear of her as much as fear of him. She felt it like a knife at her throat. If she lost them now, they might turn on her as a mob. She lifted her voice, firm, unshaken. "If I were the killer, would I still stand here? Would I warn you? Save your children? Face his? Knife myself? Number. I would be hidden in shadow, laughing while you tore each other apart. Just as he does now." The villagers froze. Her words rang with truth, undeniable. Heads nodded, some slowly, some fiercely. Eyes turned back to Cleeve. And this time, suspicion stuck. He shifted slightly, his mask cracking again. For the first time, sweat gleamed on his brow. Marple stepped closer, her lantern light falling full on his face. "You tried to smear the pews with poison. You planted sweets for children. You laughed in the vestry shadows, and you struck at me twice with your blade. Shall I go on? Every act of cruelty has your mark upon it, Mr. Cleeve." He glared at her, his lips pressed tight. Then he smiled again, but the smile was brittle, a mask strained to breaking. "You think you know," he said softly, "but you have no proof." "Not yet," she replied, her voice low but steady, "but you are unraveling. One more act, one more slip, and every eye will see you as clearly as I do." The villagers murmured, fear shifting into grim anger. They clutched each other, whispering that it must be true. The boy's mother spat on the floor at Cleeve's feet. Briggs tightened his grip on the truncheon, glaring uncertainly. The balance was tipping. Cleve felt it too. His calm facade flickered, his hand twitching toward his coat pocket before he stopped himself. Marple saw it and smiled coldly. He was armed still and desperate. She turned to the crowd, raising her hand. "Hear me. Another will die before dawn if we do nothing. But I promise you this, I will not let him silence us all. When he moves again, and he will, I will name him, and then you will see." The candles flickered, their flames bowing as if to the weight of her words. The villagers sat frozen, their breaths shallow, their eyes darting between Marple and Cleve. The rope of tension stretched tighter, ready to snap. The killer's mask was cracking, the truth pressing hard against it. One more strike, and the face beneath would be revealed. Miss Marple stood firm, her lantern high, her bloodied sleeve forgotten. She knew the danger was thick, knew her own life was the bait dangling on the hook. But she also knew this. The killer's composure was gone. He was cornered, desperate, and reckless. The trap was nearly sprung. Soon, very soon, his hand would give him away, and when it did, Jane Marple would be ready. The bell outside sank. Luke's tolled the hour, its heavy note quivering through the stone walls. The villagers flinched at the sound as though it were a death knell meant for them. They sat hunched together in the pews, pale faces reflecting the quivering candlelight, waiting for the next scream, the next collapse, the next life stolen. The air itself seemed poisoned, heavy with fear. Miss Marple stood at the altar, lantern raised, her eyes sweeping over every face. The net was tightening. The killer was cornered, and she knew he would strike again. Soon. He had no choice. She turned to the crowd. "You have seen his pattern. Poison in your cups, poison on your pews, knives in the fog, fire in the nave. Each act faster, each more reckless. He cannot stop now. He must kill again tonight because he knows I am ready to speak. And I tell you this, his final victim has already been chosen." Gasps rippled through the villagers. A woman cried out, "Who? Who is it?" Others clutched their children, staring at her with desperate eyes. Tilling groaned, sweat running down his face, and buried his head in his hands. Cleve sat rigid in his pew, calm and silent, though his jaw clenched visibly. His mask was slipping, but still not shattered. Miss Marple pointed toward Tilling. "It is you. He marked you hours ago. He struck at you in your own shop. He struck at you in the tea-room. He will not rest until your silence is sealed forever." Tilling whimpered, shaking his head violently. "No! Don't say it aloud. He'll hear. He'll come for me now." His terror was plain, but so too was his knowledge. Every eye turned toward Cleve, suspicion hardening into certainty. Cleve rose slowly, his tall frame casting a long shadow across the nave. His voice, when it came, was still measured but sharper than before, a veneer cracking at the edges. "And so it continues. This old woman weaving panic into nooses, binding you all with suspicion. If the butcher dies tonight, will you thank her for naming him? Or will you see at last that she is the cause?" The crowd stirred uneasily. Some muttered agreement, others glared at him. Miss Marple stepped closer, her lantern light spilling full upon his face. "You protest too much, mister." Cleve, a man falsely accused, rages. A man rightly accused dissembles. And you are the latter. He sneered faintly, but sweat glistened on his brow. His eyes flicked once, quick as a blade, toward the boy and his mother in the pews. Marple saw it, sharp as a hawk. Her heart tightened. The killer was shifting his choice. He would not strike Tilling under every watchful eye. He would strike where pain would be greatest, where innocence would buy him distraction. The child. She raised her voice sharply. "Everyone look at the boy. "He is marked," the mother screamed, clutching her son close, glancing wildly around as though knives might spring from the shadows. The villagers rose as one, chaos swelling. And in that chaos, Cleve moved. He darted from his pew, swift and silent, his hand plunging into his coat. Steel flashed in the lantern light. Gasps erupted, villagers screaming, stumbling back. He lunged toward the pew where the boy cowered. The mother shrieked. Briggs roared and swung his truncheon, but too slow. Marple moved first. With surprising speed, she seized the sugar bowl she had carried since the tea shop, still wrapped in linen, its contents deadly. She hurled it at his feet. The bowl shattered, crystals scattering across the flagstones. The sharp scent of almonds filled the air. Cleve froze instinctively, his knife raised, his eyes darting downward to the poison he had crafted. For one heartbeat, his mask fell entirely. Fear, recognition, and rage twisted his features naked before every eye. "There!" Marple cried, her voice ringing. "His guilt betrays him. Who else recoils from his own weapon? Who else fears the very poison that has felled so many tonight?" The villagers roared. "It's him!" "She's right." "The schoolmaster!" Fury surged through them, breaking fear's hold. Briggs leapt, tackling Cleve from behind. The knife clattered across the stones. Others rushed forward, pinning his arms, wrenching him to the ground. He thrashed, spitting curses, his composure gone at last. The mask was shattered. Only the killer remained. "You fools!" he bellowed, his voice harsh and wild. "You think she's saved you? You think this ends here? I'll take more of you before dawn." He kicked and writhed, but the villagers held fast, their fear transmuted into rage. Spittle flew from his mouth, his eyes blazing with hatred. "Even bound, I'll see her dead. Her most of all." Marple stepped forward, her lantern casting light upon his twisted face. Her voice was calm, almost sorrowful. "You will see nothing more tonight, Mr. Cleve. Your arrogance was your undoing. Every death you sowed has brought you to this floor, bound by the very hands you sought to silence." The villagers shouted in agreement, their voices fierce. Some wept with relief, others trembled with fury. The boy clung to his mother, sobbing, while Briggs tightened the ropes around Cleve's wrists. For the first time all night, the crowd looked to Marple not with suspicion, but with gratitude and awe. She had seen what none of them dared. She had led them to the truth. But she did not relax. She raised her hand for silence. "Do not think it is finished. He has slipped bonds before, struck from shadow, poisoned in plain sight. Until he is taken away under guard, none of you are safe. Keep your eyes sharp. He will try again." Even as she spoke, Cleve lunged forward suddenly, biting down on Briggs's hand like a rabid dog. The constable cried out, dropping his truncheon. Cleve surged upward, half free, his bound hands reaching for the knife that lay on the stones. Gasps and screams erupted anew. For a heartbeat, it seemed he might break loose, that the night's terror was not yet done. Marple moved with quiet precision. She lifted her lantern and swung it downward with all her strength. The glass shattered against the floor beside the knife, flames bursting across the flagstones in a flare of light and heat. The knife lay beyond his reach now, the fire licking at its steel. Cleve recoiled, his face twisted in rage, pinned once more beneath the villager's grip. His curses rang off the stone, bitter and impotent. Marple straightened, her breath sharp, her sleeve torn and bloodied, but her eyes bright. "You see? Even in his last moments he seeks another weapon. He will not stop until he is removed. Bind him tighter and pray the inspector comes swiftly." The villagers obeyed, doubling the knots, their fury feeding their strength. Cleve sagged at last, his fight spent, his chest heaving, but his eyes still burned, fixed upon Marple with undying hatred. "You've won a battle, old woman," he rasped, "but the war between us isn't done." She met his gaze without fear. "It is done. And it was never a war, it was murder, and now it is justice." The villagers murmured agreement, their terror slowly ebbing into weary relief. They looked at her not as a frail old woman, but as the only reason any of them still lived. Yet Marple knew better than to bask in triumph. 6 lives had been lost that night. Innocence had been shattered. Silence had killed as surely as poison. There was no triumph in that, only survival. She turned back to the altar, her voice carrying through the nave. "We will last until dawn. Hold fast, all of you. Watch him, and watch one another. This night is nearly over." The candles flickered low, the air thick with smoke and fear, but a sliver of hope now pierced the gloom. The killer had been unmasked. His mask was gone forever. Yet danger still lingered in every breath. Dawn had not yet broken, and the game was not yet finished. Cleve lay bound at the foot of the altar, ropes cutting deep into his wrists, his chest heaving as though each breath were a battle. Yet even pinned to the flagstones by 6 furious villagers, he looked more like a wolf caught in a snare than a defeated man. His eyes blazed with venom, fixed on Miss Marple with such hatred that several mothers turned their children away, afraid even of his gaze. The villagers murmured in fearful tones, some whispering prayers, others insisting he be hanged on the spot. Constable Briggs, pale and sweating, barked at them to stand back, but his voice lacked authority. Miss Marple raised her hand, and at once the noise dwindled. Even in the chaos, even with blood still dripping from her torn sleeve, her presence commanded more respect than the constable could muster. "This is not finished," she said firmly, her eyes never leaving Cleve. "He has slipped bonds before. He will try again, and if he does, he will take another before we can stop him. We must outwit him, not merely restrain him." "He's caught," Briggs stammered, trying to sound confident. "He's got nothing left but his curses." Marple shook her head. "No. A man who has killed so many in one night, who has grown bolder with each act, does not lie quiet until dawn. He waits, Briggs. He waits for a chance. And if we are foolish enough to think him powerless, he will seize it." The villagers shivered. Some muttered that she was right. Others looked at the bound schoolmaster with dread, as though he might spring up like a demon at any moment. Marple stepped closer to him, her lantern light falling across his face. "You have killed with poison, with blade, with fear." You laughed as women collapsed at their own tables, as a maid fell dead in her mistress's pew. You silenced Henderson and tried to silence me. And still you are not done. Cleve sneered, his lips curling. "Done? You think this rope ends me? No, Miss Marple, I am not finished until you are beneath the earth. All of this, every death, every scream, was to reach you. You are the final prize." The villagers gasped, horror rippling through them. Some clutched rosaries, others crossed themselves. Briggs gripped his truncheon tighter, but his hands trembled. Marple did not flinch. She leaned closer, her voice steady. "You see? Even now, he confesses, not in words you can write in a ledger, but in arrogance too strong to hide. He tells you plainly, I was always his quarry." Cleve spat at her feet, his eyes burning. "And before this night ends, I will have you." Marple straightened, drawing her shawl tighter. "Perhaps. But not on your terms," she turned to the crowd. "We cannot simply wait for dawn. The inspector will not arrive in time. We must force his hand now, while every eye is upon him." The villagers murmured uneasily. "Force his hand? What do you mean?" Marple's voice cut clean through their questions. "We will give him the chance he craves. We will let him think he is free. We will let him strike, and in that strike he will damn himself beyond denial." A farmer shook his head violently. "It's madness. You'll be killed." Others shouted agreement, but Marple only lifted her chin. "Do you not see? He has already vowed to kill me. Whether I walk away or stay here, he will come for me. Better I choose the ground and the moment than wait for his knife in the dark. If I am bait, then let me be bait. And when he lunges, you will see his guilt plain as the sun." The silence that followed was heavy. At last Briggs muttered, "If you're set on it, I'll stand guard at your side." Marple shook her head. "No, you must keep the others safe. If you stand with me, he will strike someone else. He must believe he has me cornered and alone. Only then will his mask fall completely." She bent suddenly, pulling from her shawl a shard of the sugar bowl she had smashed earlier. Its surface still glistened faintly with the crystals of cyanide. She held it high. "This was his weapon. Let it be his trap. When he sees me hold it, he will know I am the only one who understands him fully, and he will not resist the urge to silence me." The villagers recoiled from the shard as though it still dripped poison, but they understood. Murmurs of assent spread. Some even nodded grimly. They wanted it finished. They wanted the wolf unmasked forever. Marple placed the shard upon the altar, her thin hand resting beside it. Then she lowered her lantern so that the light fell across her face and the jagged piece of glass. She stood very still, a lone figure bathed in trembling light, her shadow stretching high against the wall. "Come then," she said softly, her voice carrying through the silent nave. "Come for me." "I am ready." The villagers held their breath. The only sound was the creak of timber, the faint hiss of candles. Cleve lay still, his chest rising and falling, his eyes fixed on her like a predator measuring the leap. His lips moved, though no sound came. Then, suddenly, he wrenched his body sideways. The ropes strained. The men holding him cursed, trying to pin him, but with a roar he twisted free of one hand. In a heartbeat he surged upward, lunging toward the altar. Gasps and screams filled the church. Briggs shouted, charging forward. Mothers covered their children's eyes. But Marple did not move. She stood steady, her lantern steady, the shard of poisoned glass gleaming at her side. Cleve's knife hand, hidden all this time in his boot, flashed upward as he lunged for her throat, his face twisted in triumph. At the last instant Marple lifted the shard. The lantern light caught it, scattering its gleam across his eyes. He faltered, instinctively, involuntarily, at the sight of his own weapon. His stride broke, his knife lowering by inches. In that single heartbeat of hesitation, Briggs struck him from behind, his truncheon crashing across the schoolmaster's shoulder. Villagers piled on, dragging him to the ground, wrenching the knife from his hand, pinning him harder than before. This time the ropes bit so deep into his flesh that blood welled. He howled, spitting fury, his composure utterly gone. The wolf had bared its teeth, and all had seen. Marple lowered the shard slowly, her hand steady, though her pulse thundered in her ears. She placed it back upon the altar, her face pale but resolute. "You see," she said to the crowd, her voice ringing. "He lunged for me alone. He recoiled from his own poison. He is the killer." There can be no doubt the villagers roared in agreement. Some shouted curses, others wept with relief. Briggs bound Cleve tighter still, his face grim. The boy's mother clutched her son, whispering thanks. Even those who had doubted Marple earlier now bowed their heads toward her, their fear transformed into gratitude. But she did not smile. Her eyes lingered on the bound man, writhing at her feet. "Do not grow complacent," she warned. "A wolf does not stop snapping until the noose is tight and the body still. He has vowed to kill me, and vows made in blood are not easily broken. Keep him bound. Keep every eye sharp. Until dawn breaks, we are not safe." The villagers murmured agreement, but relief still spread through them like warmth after frost. For the first time all night, they believed the end might truly come. Marple stepped back from the altar, her lantern swaying. Her body ached, her wound throbbed, but her eyes were clear. She had sprung the trap. She had forced him to reveal himself fully before every eye. Now all that remained was to survive the final hours until dawn. Cleve sagged against the ropes, his face twisted with hatred, his voice hoarse. "You think you've won, old woman, but I will have you yet. Before this night ends, I will taste your blood." His words slithered through the silence like venom. Some villagers shuddered, others shouted for him to be gagged. Briggs stuffed a cloth into his mouth, silencing the curses at last. Yet the look in his eyes remained, burning and unbroken. Marple turned away, her shoulders heavy, but her spirit unbowed. She knew he meant it. He would try again, and she would be ready. The church was hushed, but for the crackle of wax from half-burned candles and the ragged breath of terrified villagers. The smell of smoke and sweat clung to the stone as if it had seeped into the very mortar. Cleve, bound hand and foot at the altar steps, writhed against his ropes like an animal, his eyes fixed on Miss Marple with undiluted hatred. His mouth was gagged now, yet he still made guttural sounds, low and menacing, the voice of a wolf straining at its leash. Constable Briggs hovered nearby, clutching his truncheon with white knuckles, his eyes darting between the killer and the villagers. But it was Miss Marple, bloodied sleeve and all, who held the true command of the room. She stood steady at the altar, lantern light flickering across her lined but resolute face. "We are not finished," she said quietly, her voice carrying through the nave. "Not until we speak the truth plainly, before all who remain." The villagers shifted uneasily, some clutching each other, others refusing to look at the bound schoolmaster. Fear still had its claws in them. Marple raised her hand, demanding silence. This man was killed because of pride and greed. The quarrel over the deeds was no simple matter of paper. It was his obsession, his festering wound. Those who cheated him, or those he believed had cheated him, became marks on his private ledger. Tonight he meant to wipe it clean with your blood. A widow sobbed softly, covering her face. The boy's mother rocked her son gently, whispering prayers. Tilling sat slumped, pale as parchment, still trembling with the knowledge he had hidden too long. Marple's gaze fell upon him, sharp and unrelenting. "And you, Mr. Tilling, you saw his face that first hour. You could have spoken. You could have stopped the second, the third, the fourth death. But you let silence bind your tongue. How many women lie cold because of it?" The butcher groaned, burying his face in his hands. "I was afraid," he whispered hoarsely. "He said he'd slit me if I spoke." His shoulders shook with sobs. "I thought maybe if I kept still, it would pass me by." Marple's voice cut, but not unkind. "Fear is no shield. Silence is no refuge. It is the accomplice of cruelty. Never forget that the villagers murmured agreement, their grief turning into anger, not only at Cleve, but at the cowardice that had fed him. She turned back to the bound man, her eyes like ice. Cleve chose poison because it was subtle, because it let him strike from behind a mask. He smeared it on pews, dropped it into cups, even fed it to a child. When poison was not enough, he raised his blade in the fog. When the blade failed, he set fire to the very house of God. Do you not see the pattern? It is not justice, not revenge, but cruelty. A hunger to make others suffer as he believes he suffered. That is the truth of this man. The villagers leaned forward, their fear hardening into certainty. Some cursed him under their breath. Briggs swallowed hard, nodding along, though his hands still trembled. For the first time, the people of Peacock Lane truly believed. The mask was shattered. The killer stood naked before them, stripped of excuses. But Cleve thrashed suddenly, a muffled howl tearing from his gag. His eyes blazed, and he rolled violently against the ropes. The men holding him swore, struggling to keep him down. With terrifying strength he wrenched one hand partially free. The gag slipped from his mouth. His voice rang out, harsh and venomous. "You think you've won, you dried-up hag? You think ropes will hold me? I'll see you bleed before dawn. I'll cut you open before their eyes." The villagers screamed. Briggs shouted, trying to force the gag back in place, but Cleve lunged against his bonds, teeth bared. His hatred poured out like poison. "She lies. She spins tales, and you lap them up like sheep. I killed, yes, but I killed for justice, for the land stolen from me, for the mockery of years. They laughed at me, spat at me, used me like dirt, and now they are dust in the ground where they belong." Gasps and cries echoed through the nave. The truth spilled, raw and unmasked. Cleve was no longer the calm schoolmaster. He was a beast, snarling, raving, confessing without care. Miss Marple raised her hand, her voice calm but steely. "You hear him? No need for my words. His own tongue damns him. Pride, vengeance, cruelty, that is his gospel." Cleve spat toward her feet. "And you, old woman, will be the last. Even if I'm bound, I will find a way." His eyes darted suddenly toward the boy again. "Or perhaps I'll take what you protect. Watch him choke, and see how clever you feel then." The boy's mother screamed, clutching her child tighter. Villagers surged forward, rage breaking their fear. Briggs struck Cleve across the jaw with his truncheon, but still the man laughed, blood in his teeth. "You can't stop me. Not her, not you, not any of you." Miss Marple moved closer, her lantern light falling across his twisted face. She spoke softly, yet her words carried to every corner. "You are wrong, Mr. Cleve. You are finished. Every death has unmasked you, every word has betrayed you, and every eye here has seen. You will never kill again," the villagers roared, their fury at last spilling free. Men grabbed tighter at his arms, women cursed him. Even the vicar raised his voice in condemnation. For the first time, the terror that had held them was broken, replaced by righteous anger. They no longer cowered before him. They stood united against him. Cleve sagged against his bonds, his chest heaving. His eyes still burned, but his voice faltered, hoarse and broken. You'll remember me. You'll never forget this night. My name will linger in your prayers, in your nightmares. That is my victory." Marple shook her head gently. "No, your name will be a curse, nothing more. They will remember the widow's, the maid, the butcher's silence, the vicar's wife at prayer. They will remember fear and cruelty, and in those memories you will be nothing but a shadow, despised and forgotten." "That is your legacy," the villagers murmured assent, nodding, some weeping quietly. The balance had shifted utterly. Cleve no longer commanded fear. He was reduced to what he had always been, a bitter man, stripped of his mask, bound by his own cruelty. Briggs shoved the gag back into his mouth, binding it tightly. The killer howled once more, muffled and futile. The constable looked to Marple, sweat streaking his brow. "Inspector will be here by morning," he muttered. "We'll hold him till then." Marple nodded faintly, her shoulders heavy with weariness. She turned to the villagers, her voice softer now, though still steady. "The night is not yet done, but the worst of it has passed. He will not kill again, not while we stand together." The crowd exhaled as one, the tension breaking at last. Mothers soothed their children, men clasped each other's shoulders, whispers of relief rising like a prayer. For the first time all night, hope touched the air. The dawn was still hours away, but they could see it now, faint at the edges of the sky. Marple lowered her lantern, her hand trembling slightly. She had survived the long night, stared into the eyes of cruelty, and lived. Yet she felt no triumph. Too many lay dead, their names weighed on her heart. But she had fulfilled her duty. She had forced the truth into the light, no matter the cost. She stepped back from the altar, her shadow long on the stone. "We will watch him till dawn," she said quietly, "and when the inspector comes, justice will take him away. Remember what has been shown here. Silence is as deadly as poison. Speak the truth, even when it burns, or you may find yourselves buried beside it." The villagers bowed their heads, chastened. The boy's mother whispered, "God bless you, Miss Marple." Others echoed her, some softly, some with tears. For the first time that night, Jane Marple allowed herself a faint, weary smile. The killer strained one last time against his ropes, but his fight was gone. The crowd's unity had broken his power. He was finished. Dawn would seal it. Until then, Jane Marple stood watch, unyielding, her lantern burning through the dark. The night dragged on like a siege. The candles sputtered lower, dripping wax in pale rivers down brass holders. The villagers huddled together in the pews, speaking in whispers, if at all, their eyes darting constantly toward the altar steps where Cleve lay bound. His wrists and ankles were tied so tightly now that blood stained the ropes. The gag muffled his curses, but his eyes still blazed with undying hatred, flicking always back to Miss Marple as though willing her to crumble under his stare. But she did not. Frail as she seemed, her back remained straight, her lantern steady in her hand. She kept watch as the clock in the tower tolled each slow quarter hour. Every strike reminded her that dawn was closer, yet each also whispered a warning. Time enough still for one last act of violence. Wolves did not stop snapping until the final breath. Constable Briggs shuffled nervously by the doors, truncheon in hand, sweat shining on his brow. He looked to Miss Marple often, as though needing her steady presence to hold his courage intact. She offered him no comfort, only the truth. "Keep your eyes sharp, Briggs. Ropes fray, knots slip. A killer will tear the flesh from his wrists if it buys him one last strike." The constable swallowed hard and nodded. He tightened the gag once more, though Cleve nearly bit his fingers for the effort. The schoolmaster's muffled growl rolled through the nave like distant thunder. Villagers whimpered, but Marple's voice cut clean through their fear. "Do not be shaken. He is finished. You have seen his mask break. You have heard his confession. He cannot undo what has been revealed." Still, the tension never fully eased. Every creak of timber, every hiss of wind at the windows made people flinch. Mothers held their children tighter, men shifted uneasily, and the vicar muttered prayers in Latin until his voice grew hoarse. Yet beneath the fear lay something new. resolve. The villagers had seen the wolf unmasked, and though they trembled, they no longer doubted. They were not sheep scattered in panic. They were a flock gathered close, and Marple was their shepherd. At last the bell tolled 4. Dawn would not be far. Pale light already pressed faintly against the stained glass, grey and weak but steady. The air inside shifted, hope flickering like the candles. Marple felt her own shoulders ease slightly. Yet she did not relax. She knew desperation could give a final burst of strength to even the weakest man, and Cleve was far from weak. The moment came suddenly. One of the men holding his ropes dozed in his pew, head nodding. In that instant, Cleve twisted savagely, his bound legs lashing out. He kicked the man squarely, sending him sprawling. With a violent wrench, he tore one wrist half free, skin peeling under the rope. The gag slipped loose. He surged upward with a roar, his voice harsh and triumphant. "I told you! I told you I'd have her!" Screams erupted. The villagers scattered back in terror. Briggs charged, but too slow. Cleve hurled himself toward Miss Marple, his eyes blazing with murderous triumph. His hands, still half-bound, clawed for her throat. Mothers shrieked, children sobbed, men shouted, but the old woman did not falter. She lifted her lantern high and smashed it at her own feet. Oil spilled, flames flaring between her and the charging man. Cleve recoiled, blinded by the sudden blaze. His boot slipped on the slick flagstones, and he crashed heavily against the altar steps. Before he could rise, Briggs and 2 others were on him, driving him down, forcing his face into the stone. He howled, cursing, spitting. But this time there was no chance of escape. The ropes were doubled, then tripled, until he could not move a finger without pain. His voice broke into hoarse snarls. He had lunged for his final prey, and he had failed. Miss Marple stepped carefully back from the flames as villagers stamped them out. Her hands trembled faintly, but her eyes were calm. She looked down at the writhing man and spoke softly, almost sorrowfully. "There ends your hunt. You vowed to taste my blood before dawn, but dawn has come, and you are finished." Indeed, the stained glass above them was glowing faintly now, touched with the first wash of gold. A shaft of pale light broke across the nave, falling directly upon the altar, and the bound killer sprawled before it. The villagers gasped, some falling to their knees, others whispering prayers of thanks. They had survived the night. The wolf was chained. The day had come. Footsteps sounded outside the heavy doors. A sharp rap followed, then a commanding voice. "Open in the king's name!" Briggs nearly sobbed with relief. He slid the bolts and flung the doors wide. Inspector Arkwright of Milchester strode in with 2 constables at his back. His eyes swept the scene. Haggard villagers, smoke-stained walls, and the bound man at the altar. "Good Lord," he muttered, "what devilry has passed here?" Miss Marple answered calmly, though her voice was hoarse with weariness. "Murder, Inspector? 6 dead, nearly more. But the killer has unmasked himself. You will find him ready for your irons." She gestured to Cleve, whose eyes blazed with undying hatred, but whose body lay broken with exhaustion, bound beyond escape. Arkwright crouched, examining him with disgust. "Cleve? Of all men, I'd not think so." He straightened, shaking his head. "You've done our work for us, Miss Marple, and likely saved half the village besides." He signaled to his constables, who seized the prisoner and bound him with iron cuffs. Cleve snarled, snapping at their hands, but it was futile. They dragged him upright, his shoulders slumped, his fight spent at last. The villagers surged forward, some shouting curses, others weeping, many thanking Marple. with trembling voices. The boy's mother clutched her child, tears streaming. "We'd have been corpses without you, miss." "God bless you," others echoed her words, surrounding the old woman with gratitude. She bowed her head slightly, her smile faint and weary. "I did only what was needed. The true strength was yours. You endured." Arkwright clapped Briggs on the shoulder. "You held them together, Constable." "Well done." Briggs flushed crimson, but said nothing. His eyes flicked to Marple, silently acknowledging who had truly commanded the night. She gave him the faintest nod, a gesture of kindness amid exhaustion. At last the constables hauled Cleve toward the door. He twisted once, straining against their grip, his eyes locking on Marple one final time. His voice rasped through cracked lips. "This isn't finished, old woman. You'll carry me in your nightmares. You'll never be rid of me." His words slithered through the air like venom, but Marple's reply was calm, steady, and final. "No, mister. Cleve, you will vanish like smoke in sunlight. Only your cruelty remains, and cruelty never lingers long." The doors slammed shut behind them, cutting off his curses. Silence filled the nave at last, broken only by quiet sobs and the faint chirp of birds outside as morning spread across Peacock Lane. The villagers slumped in relief, holding each other, weeping, whispering thanks. Miss Marple lowered herself slowly into a pew, her hands trembling now that the long ordeal was over. The weight of 6 deaths pressed upon her, heavy as stone, but so too did the knowledge that she had prevented more. Survival, not triumph, was the measure of this night. The vicar approached, laying a hand gently on her shoulder. "You have been God's instrument, Miss Marple. We owe you everything." She shook her head faintly. "No, vicar, you owe me nothing. Only remember this night. Remember that silence feeds cruelty. Speak truth, even when it burns. That is the only shield against such darkness." The villagers nodded, some through tears. They would remember. They would whisper of this night for years, the night the schoolmaster's mask shattered, the night Jane Marple stood unyielding against poison, fire, and blade. They would tell their children how an old woman saw what none else dared see, and saved them by truth alone. The dawn brightened, casting golden light across the nave, washing the stone in warmth. The long terror ended. Jane Marple closed her eyes briefly, weary beyond measure, but her spirit unbowed. She had stared into the heart of cruelty and endured. The masquerade in the dusty mirror had ended with the mirror shattered, the mask broken, and the truth laid bare. At last she rose, shawled tight around her shoulders, and stepped into the sunlight of a new day. The villagers followed, blinking into the dawn. Behind them the church stood scarred by fire and fear, but still standing. Ahead lay the ordinary rhythm of life forever changed by the memory of a single night when death had haunted Peacock Lane, and Jane Marple had hunted death in return.